We are now in Westwego, and yes, that's actually what it's called. The community has a very cheeky way it got that name, but first go to patreon.com/LouisianaDread to enjoy more history videos like the one you're about to watch. There were Native Americans in this area for literally thousands of years before European arrival. These indigenous people created huge shell middens that can still be seen in the area today. Later, the French would arrive and develop the area in 1719 when French Minister of State Claude Leblanc started a plantation and a port along the Mississippi River, the latter of which became a major spot for the transatlantic slave trade. The town of Westwego was officially founded in 1870, and mainly due to the fact the Texas and Pacific Railroad placed a railroad yard here and docks along the Mississippi River. The Zerang family had the largest plantation in the area that relied on slave labor to farm their sugarcane until the canal was dug nearby by commission of Camille Zerang. Other plantations in the area were named White House, Magnolia Lane, and La Branch, among others. The canal was dug by the Barataria and Lafourche Canal Company, and it was called just the Company Canal. This area was a prime location back in the day due to that canal that junctioned at the river by a lock system. A ferry would bring people from where I'm standing to New Orleans and then to the Westank back. Now, once in the canal, it was a straight shot towards Bayou Signet, then onward to Bayou Lafourche, which connects to the Gulf of Mexico near Grand Isle. Keep in mind that this was about 10 years before Nicholas Destrehan built the Harvey Canal. This water route would allow Cajuns along Bayou Lafourche to access the New Orleans markets more easily. No one really knows for certain how Westwego got its name, but many believe it's for sure because of that railroad. This community was the location that the state compensated the railroad company to build continuing tracks further west. Legend says that the travelers departed the station here and they would hear the conductor yell, "West we go!" In John Churchill Chase's book, Frenchmen Desire Good Children, it states that the name was the specific outcome of an 1871 meeting of a railroad board of directors in New York, where planning was undertaken to use the site as an eastern terminus, and they simply stated, "West we go from there." Some people speculate Westwego might have been influenced by the board members' familiarity with the name of Oswego, New York. Yet another theory says that the workers themselves dubbed the community Westwego as an advertising ploy, but whichever the case may be, the first usage of the name was by G.W.R. Bailey, a railroad engineer, in 1873. One story states that Westwego got the name because it was a major crossing point on the Mississippi River during the Great Westward Movement in the late 19th century. So when travelers were asked their destination, they would simply reply, "West we go." Thus, the town of Westwego was settled, though. 1892 was a pivotal year for this little community because that's the year a 65-year-old Spaniard arrived by the name of Pablo Sala. Sala bought a portion of the Zerang plantation, which included the Seven Oaks plantation house. He would hire an engineer to plot out 162 lots next to the Company Canal and call the new community Salaville, after himself, of course. Salaville would be largely populated by the formerly enslaved people of the Seven Oaks plantation due to the proximity, and by 1893 there were about 200 people living and working in the new community near Westwego. Unfortunately, 1893 was also a horrific year for the people of Louisiana. On September 27, 1893, the most devastating hurricane to ever hit the United States made landfall over Grand Isle and Cheniere-Caminada. The night before the storm, there were 2,000 people living on Cheniere, but by the next morning, only around 800 were still alive. This caused a migration of survivors to scatter farther north. Plenty settled in Cutoff and Leeville along Bayou Lafourche, but another large group of these refugees settled in Salaville. Some of these new settlers would only be temporary, but other families still living in Westwego today can trace their lineage to survivors of that exact storm. In fact, most people can hear a similarity of the accents between the Westank and Grand Isle and Cheniere. To accept this large group of refugees, Pablo Sala sold inexpensive empty lots along Sala Avenue. And within a year, 20 Cheniere refugee families called Salaville home, with more coming each month, since they could continue their seafaring professions to Grand Isle via the Westwego and new Harvey Canal. Pablo Sala would also convert the Seven Oaks plantation into a tourist destination and resort called Columbia Gardens, which is one of the first major instances of converting antebellum plantations into tourist attractions. He would die before seeing it complete though, and his sister Maria Sala y Fabreguesa would take over in his wake. Maria added more property towards Bayou Signet and made way for even more people to settle. By 1899, the population of Westwego and Salaville were about 500, and these weren't your typical New Orleanians either. This population was made up mostly of Cajuns, Creoles, and Africans, with much of that population increase either directly or indirectly attributable to the Cheniere hurricane. This brought coastal folklife and traditions to the greater New Orleans area and made Sala Avenue the region's cannery row, which was home to seafood processing, canning, packing, and distribution industries, all of it. Now, unfortunately, Westwego is no stranger to a very common enemy in Louisiana history, and if you've been watching this channel for a while, you probably already know what I'm about to say. The Durack-Terrebonne Fishermen's Exchange building is now the home of the Westwego Historical Museum. But only a few houses down, a guy named Alidor Guidry awoke to the smell of smoke. Right before dawn on April 14, 1907, Alidor rushed out of his apartment as it succumbed to the flames that were fed by northeasterly winds. Like the vast majority of Louisiana towns at the time, Salaville homes were all wooden, which fueled the fire that was now sweeping down Sala Avenue. Panicked residents formed a bucket brigade to put out the flames since there were few resources available to stop a wildfire. Horse-drawn fire engines arrived via the Walnut Street ferry from New Orleans, but the damage had been done. By noon, 42 buildings were burned to the ground, including the town hall, church, schools, numerous businesses like the Fishermen's Exchange, and 600 people, some of whom fled the hurricane-ravaged Cheniere, were now homeless again. This event would be known as the Westwego Fire of 1907, and such a blaze hadn't been seen since the Great Algiers Fire of 1895. But the community rebuilt. Louisiana people are objectively resilient and are widely known to not be held down long. Now, the homes were reconstructed and the cannery industry recovered. The True Vine Baptist Church is the oldest place of worship in Westwego. This church was founded by free men of color and is where generations of descendants of the enslaved populations from the Zerang plantation congregated to worship since 1898, with services being held at the home of Martin Tilton on Sala Avenue since 1865. With new technologies and advancements, Westwego would go full industrial along the river in the 20th century with large grain elevators dotting the landscape across the entire West Bank. Unfortunately, these would also be subject to tragedy and despair. 2 days before Christmas, December 23, 1977, the Continental Grain Elevator exploded in a fiery inferno. It would also cause a concrete tower to collapse on a nearby office building, killing 36 people and injuring at least 11 others. The workers were gathered in that office celebrating a Christmas party. Now, it's believed that the explosion was caused by grain dust that ignited. Once the explosion occurred, it was like a domino effect for the falling silos as one after the other leaned on the one next to it. Other explosions would occur in the 2-year span, which would eventually lead to new regulations to prevent dust ignition explosions. The West Bank grain explosion is still the deadliest grain elevator accident in world history. Despite the numerous trials and tribulations, Westwego still has its historical charms and locations just perfect for a weekend visit. Grab a bite at a local restaurant and tour the Westwego Historical Museum, or take a walk by the Lazy River Landing, which we are right now, and you can see the Crescent City right on the other side of this mighty Mississippi. Now, we couldn't bring you this information without your support on Patreon, and we'd like to thank all those who have already contributed and encourage anyone watching this video right now to consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/LouisianaDread. Now, for more Louisiana history, horror, folklore, and culture, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm Kyle Crosby, and this is Louisiana Dread Quick History.